In October, pot will be a legal, if regulated, commodity for sale to the general public in Ontario. Medicinal and recreational. Even 10 years ago, that idea seemed unthinkable, as official Canada has long viewed it as the demon weed and worse. How did we get from there to here? Let's find out. We'll ask. In Chicago, Illinois, via Skype, Catherine Carstairs. She's a professor of history at the University of Guelph and author of Jailed for Possession, Illegal Drug Use, Regulation and Power in Canada, 1920 to 1961. And here in studio, Marcel Martel, the Avi Bennett Historica Chair in Canadian History at York University and the author of Not This Time, Canadians, Public Policy and the Marijuana Question, 1961 to 1975. And Akwasi Owusu-Bempah, Professor of Sociology at the University of Toronto. Akwasi, we welcome you back to the program. To our two other guests, we welcome you here for the first time. It's lovely to meet you both. We're going to take a bit of a walk down memory lane here as we consider that on the 17th of October of this year, marijuana will be legal. That will mark the end of nearly a century of pot prohibition in Canada. And Catherine, I want you to take us back all the way to the beginning. Cannabis was added to the schedule of banned substances back in 1923, as we say, almost a century ago. Why was it added to the list back at that time?
Well, there are a couple of theories as to why it got added. There was very little discussion of it at the time. So the House of Commons added it to the schedule of restricted drugs. There was no debate in the House of Commons about adding it to the schedule. So the first theory has been that a woman by the name of Emily Murphy, who'd been very instrumental in the anti-drug panic that arose in the early 1920s in Canada. She had included a chapter on marijuana in her book, The Black Candle, in which she said that marijuana turned people into raving lunatics and led them to commit murder and all sorts of fanciful things. I don't think that was the reason why marijuana was added to the schedule of restricted drugs. Instead, Canada was in a series of international discussions in which cannabis came under discussion. And I think it was as a result of those discussions that Canada decided it was going to be ahead of the game and that it was going to add cannabis to its own schedule before it came under international control. And cannabis was added to the international conventions in 1925. So we were ahead ahead of the game in terms of adding it to the schedule of restricted drugs. And certainly bureaucrats in the narcotic division always said that that was why they had added cannabis to the schedule.
Akwasi, do we know whether or not there was a sense at the time that Canadians were just indulging in pot way too much and therefore something ought to be done about it?
There seems to have been no concern about the drug generally, no concern about use, no concern about problematic use. As Catherine has pointed out, it does seem kind of curious and largely a response to something that seemed to be coming as opposed to a problem that we saw here in Canada.
Marcel, let's get your theory on this. If it was virtually unknown in Canada and it appears not to have been wildly out of control, why add it to the list of banned substances?
Well, I will just repeat what we have heard.
Well, don't do that. I don't need you to repeat what we've heard.
Then I'll try to be original by mentioning something that Sharon Carstairs mentioned earlier, which is the role that Canada has played in terms of mobilizing the international community in launching this war on drugs. Mackenzie King, the famous Prime Minister, before he became Prime Minister, he was sent to an international conference in Shanghai, I think in 1907, 1908, and Mackenzie King with other Americans, really pushed the agenda of putting first, opium, but also other drugs on the list of substances that we should, that the world community should ban. Then Canada has played, a role in enrolling the rest of the world in this war on drugs.
Well, you've raised China, so let me circle back to Catherine and pick up the conversation there. You mentioned Emily Murphy's book a few moments ago, The Black Candle, suggesting that people would become raving maniacs if they did that. Then there was a Maclean's magazine series of articles in 1920 in which Murphy warned, apparently, that drug-addled young women would give in to the sexual demands, I'm just quoting from the past here, would give in to the sexual demands of Chinese men, leading to the birth of mixed-race babies. Catherine, what role do you think the opium scare and sort of anti-Chinese racist sentiment of the day had in making marijuana illegal in the 20s?
Well, certainly in the early 1920s, there was a huge anti-drug campaign in Canada. Emily Murphy was a leading figure in that, but there were also drug crusaders across the country, most especially in Vancouver. And the fact that the anti-drug campaign was particularly strong in Vancouver was no surprise, because Vancouver was also a place where many people were organizing to restrict Chinese immigration to Canada. The Chinese Immigration Act, which banned all Chinese immigration to Canada, passes in 1923. So at roughly the same time that we're getting all this new drug legislation. And so the two campaigns were very much tied together. And anti-drug campaigners like Murphy, but many others, continually blamed the Chinese in Canada for bringing the drug menace to Canada, for exposing young white women and young white men to drugs, leading to their downfall. And so it was seen as just another reason for removing and restricting Chinese immigration to Canada.
Now, Kwasi, let me get you to follow up on the race angle and what role you think that played nearly 100 years ago. Yeah, certainly. With regards to the Opium Act in 1908, I think without a doubt, part of the reason that act was passed was to further control the Chinese population. So one way to do that was through restricting immigration, but of course we see the end of the railroad projects, and there was a lot of Chinese labor that was brought over to work on the railroad projects. And once those projects were complete, those laborers were then competition for white laborers. And so there were riots in Vancouver around this time too, and Mackenzie King was out there viewing this, and the Opium Act passed not too long after. So I think when we look back to the laws around opium and cannabis as well, whether or not it was so explicit in the Canadian context with regards to cannabis, there's been a racialized angle to this. For those people of a certain generation who remember the propaganda that came out in the 1930s against reefer madness, Sheldon, shall we? Go.
Smoking the soul-destroying reefer, they find a moment's pleasure, but at a terrible price. Debauchery, violence, murder, suicide. And the ultimate end of the marijuana addict. Hopeless insanity.
Ah, yes, holds up to today just perfectly. Here's a movie poster now. Let's continue on. From the 1930s, and if you can't see some of the language on it here, the cut lines are shame, horror, despair, weed with roots in hell, lust, crime, and sorrow. It warns of weird orgies. I hasten to add not regular orgies, but weird orgies, wild parties, and unleashed passions. Okay, well, let's just ask the question directly. Does marijuana destroy your soul, Marcel, and turn you into a raving murderer that enjoys weird but not regular orgies?
Well, unfortunately, some people did say yes to that, especially, religious leaders. Of course, when we look at it now, we read, you read the excerpt from the poster. Mm-hmm. It makes us laugh. However, at the beginning of the 20th century, you have Christians deeply concerned with what was happening, in society, or really believe that, life was hard. Because life is hard, well, you're supposed, to work hard. You're not supposed to take drugs in order to escape reality. You're not supposed to drink, well, I'm glad we are drinking water, but you're not supposed to drink, alcohol, because you will try to escape reality. Then we, those words that were that you just shared with us, there were some people who really believe that it's exactly what would happen if you take, drugs, because it would destroy you as a human being, and above all, it will destroy, your soul.
Well, Catherine, the examples we just played obviously came out of the United States, and I wonder how much the American influence against this drug, what kind of impact that had on Canadian decision makers at the time.
It does have a minor influence. I mean, Canada was ahead of the curve. We'd already put marijuana on the schedule of restricted drugs, whereas in the U.S., marijuana is not regulated federally until 1937 with the Marijuana Tax Act. So things like reefer madness are playing into the growing demand to do something about marijuana at the federal level in the United States. The small impact that it seems to have in Canada, you do start to see some marijuana arrests in Canada in the 1930s, which we hadn't seen prior to that time. So we added in 1923, but there's no arrest in Canada, indicating that usage was probably smaller. The police were just unaware, are uninterested in enforcing the law. But then in the 1930s, the RCMP, under pressure from the United States, start going to farms, actually, across Canada who are growing hemp as a windbreaker, rather, and say, look, you really need to get rid of this agricultural item and burn it. And so people agree they're not using it for its psychotropic effects. They're using it as a windbreaker. The one exception I found to that was that there was an older woman that they approached and said, you know, you have to destroy this weed that's growing on your property. And she was like, oh, but I feed it to my canaries and it makes them sing so sweetly. And apparently she ushered the RCMP out of her house with a broom, and the RCMP decided that it would be better to let her grow her cannabis. But, you know, so that was the sort of one minor effect it seems to have had in Canada. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of attention paid to marijuana in Canada in the 1930s.
Akwasi, singing birds aside, do you know what kind of influence America had in getting Canada to change its views on this? Well,
I think one of the things that we talked about is we need to recognize the cultural similarities between Canada and the United States, and how much we do kind of bounce off of one another with regards to social issues. So, you know, from where we stand, we often think of ourselves as very different, but on the international stage, that's certainly not the case. We look much more similar. And I do think that a lot of kind of beliefs from south of the border crept here, and some of our beliefs, like, it was very much a back and forth. And so with regards to, you know, these ideas about what the drug would do, like we could look at Harry Anslinger and his survey that he put out to doctors, asking doctors about the negative effects of cannabis. And of the 20 doctors or so that he surveyed, only one agreed that, yes, it had all of these disastrous effects. And he capitalized, or he focused on the response of that one doctor and ignored the rest, which seems to kind of mirror the trends with regards to our views on the drugs ever since.
Well, let's move our discussion along here to the 1950s, and we're going to play another movie clip, this time another anti-marijuana movie, this one, 1951. Sheldon, go.
Marty's story is like many of the others. It started with marijuana cigarettes.
Come on, it's my turn next. Gee, Duke, where'd you get him? I know a guy. 3 for $1. Let me try.
He was determined to be one of the gang if it killed him. And it almost did. Several weeks later, after smoking reefers, Marty's befogged brain hit on a clever way to open pop bottles. Later, Stan went to the hospital for swallowing broken glass. Marty badly cut the inside of his mouth, though he didn't even know it at the time.
Okay, Marcel, this is, again, you know, almost 30 years after Reefer Madness, and pot is still being portrayed as this drug that's going to make you a psychopathic killer. Why no progress in those intervening years?
No progress on the part of...
on the part of sort of our understanding of what the realities of this drug were.
I would say the only progress that we have noticed, it's now what this clip was telling us. There is a link between, if you try it once, and horrible things that you could do later on. And this is an argument that would be repeated again and again, that you try marijuana once, and guess what? Not only you are losing control of yourself, but you'll do horrible things such as what we have seen in the clip.
In the 1960s, Akwasi, that one-dimensional villain was replaced with something else. What?
Certainly. Well, we have a number of associations. Of course, we get into the 1960s and 70s and the free love and peace. We've got the Vietnam War. The drug becomes associated with communism, with hippies, and this kind of more complex view. Now, and this is where things start to get interesting, of course, because we have had this demonized view, and certainly like popular sentiment would have been that cannabis was a dangerous thing and that cannabis users themselves would be dangerous. And then as use started to increase amongst this kind of younger generation, and perhaps even some of their parents, concerns started to arise, as did the arrests that were coming from increased criminalization, that, you know, it could be harmful to the young Mr. and Mrs. Smith's young son might be adversely affected by the criminal record he'd get from a cannabis arrest. All
right, let's move us along into the late 1960s, early 1970s. And I want to read a quote here, and Catherine, I'll get you to comment on this first. This quote comes in 1994 from a guy named John Ehrlichman. And again, those of us of a certain age certainly remember him as a senior policy advisor, domestic policy advisor for President Richard Nixon. Very much caught up in the whole Watergate thing. The administration under Nixon declares war on drugs in 1971, and here's what John Ehrlichman has to say about that. You want to know what this was really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black people. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Now, I guess in the interests of fairness here, we should point out that Ehrlichman may have been exaggerating because he was not a big fan of Richard Nixon's at this point. He felt betrayed by Nixon. After all, he did go to jail for Watergate. Having said that, Catherine, how much at face value do we take this really very disturbing boast of John Ehrlichman's?
Oh, I think there's definitely some truth to it. The Nixon war on drugs was highly politically motivated to get rid of the people that, you know, he did not feel that were in support of his administration more generally. And I think using the drug issue was a way of achieving political advantage for Nixon.
Akwasi, your view on this angle here? Yeah, I would agree. There are actually some much more derogatory things said earlier on in that quote, which I won't repeat on TV. But as I noted, the drugs have long been used as a tool of social control, and I think this is a prime example of a resurgence of that, and something that we saw continue on afterwards. Do you know how much of that view spilled over the border to us here in Canada? Well, I think one of the things we need to acknowledge is that, you know, our law enforcement, our politicians speak, right? Many of our law enforcers go down south of the border for training, and that's something that's looked highly upon. And we're exposed to a lot of American media as well. So I think without a doubt, there was some sharing of ideas and views there. Well, except that, Marcel, in 1973, so we are still a year away from Nixon's resignation, but we are in the thick of all of this, we had a royal commission here in Canada. 1973, it was called the Ledane Commission, and it recommended, and we're 45 years ago now, it recommended 45 years ago the decriminalization of marijuana. Obviously, it did not happen. Do we know why it didn't happen?
Lack of political will. Well, since the 1960s, we have been talking about drugs. We have been talking about marijuana. It was a very divisive debate. You know, RCMP, concerned parents, religious leaders, social activists, hippies. Well, they expressed their views, and there were several views being expressed. You know, some pushed for legalization, others said no decriminalization, and others said no way. The status quo, it's the best option, because if we go ahead with decriminalization, well, where do you stop? If you go with legalization, well, others will come with, well, we have now to decriminalize or maybe legalize, you know, heroin, etc. And basically what happened, the liberals who were in power, they had many other issues to deal with, and they decided not to push that one further. They had already dealt with the abortion, partial decriminalization. They dealt with bilingualism. It was already very controversial. Then at one point, you know, the Liberals felt, and the Prime Minister's office felt that maybe we should be careful, or maybe public opinion was not ready to move ahead with, you know, decriminalization.
Well, let me follow up with Catherine a little more on that, because of course the current Prime Minister's father, Pierre, was the Prime Minister at this time. He had already said the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation and had decriminalized homosexuality. You're right that he had liberalized abortion services in the country at this point. But somehow the line in the sand got drawn here, and despite, presumably Prime Minister, the father, Trudeau's personal views on marijuana, he met with John Lennon, he met with Yoko Ono. I think he knew they weren't choir boy and choir girl. A line in the sand was drawn. Do you know why, Catherine?
Well, I'm not sure if I would characterize it quite that way. So in 1969, Canada does significantly reduce the penalties. And so many people, prior to 1969, it was still very common for people to receive a 6-month minimum jail term for marijuana possession. And so in 1969, the penalties were changed, and so many people just got a suspended sentence. And so I think to some degree, the concern that had existed before about, young middle-class youth who would become the primary marijuana users in the 1960s. And there was a lot of people, not only those youth were arguing that the laws should change, but also their parents were saying, wow, okay, my kid has done this drug. It doesn't seem that harmful to me. The fact that they should have a criminal record for life and have to go to prison for 6 months seemed quite outrageous to many people. So the fact that the penalties were changed in 1969, I think, was felt by many people to be enough. And so even though Ledane had recommended the decriminalization of marijuana, I think as Marcel describes, the political will to make further change just wasn't there in the early 1970s. Understood.
Let's move then to the 1980s. And this one, again, for those of us of a certain age, we remember this one rather well. This is from the United States in the 80s, an anti-marijuana ad. Sheldon, let's see it.
Okay, last time. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
And just because we wanted to get into the mix as well, there was a Canadian anti-marijuana public service announcement from the Conservative government in 2014, much more recently, and let's have a look at that one, Sheldon.
Did you know that marijuana is on average 300 to 400% stronger than it was 30 years ago? And that smoking marijuana can seriously harm a teen's developing brain? Smoking marijuana, it can damage a teen for life. Get the facts and talk with your kids about the dangers of smoking marijuana.
Those ads, actually, they look somewhat similar, even though they're 3 decades apart. The notion that your brain is somehow being fried. Let's just follow up on this, because that one, Akwasi, that's only 4 years ago.
It's only 4 years
That's only 4 years ago, and it is still a very kind of scary, harsh message about what marijuana can do to you. What's your thought about that approach?
Certainly. So I think it signifies, and our views kind of shift, obviously, very rapidly thereafter, but a continuation of this demonization of the drug, right? And I want to say a bit of a mischaracterization of the science, but unfortunately, because the drug was criminalized for so long, we don't have as much, science or research around it as we could. But I think there are obviously some clear parallels there, and I would imagine the people that created that second public health campaign had the first one in mind. I see that, here's your brain on drugs. Any questions? I'm like, yeah, where's the bacon and some toast? Because I want to eat that fried egg. Right? But I think there are some clear parallels between the two.
Clear parallels, but let me get a little more serious just for a second here, although I hate to do that because that was a very funny line. Well done. The ad that the Conservative government brought out 4 years ago, that's true, though. What they said in the ad is true. If you are too young and you mess with this stuff, it will kill your brain cells, and if you do it too much, it will stunt your intellectual development. That's true, isn't it?
Well, again, it depends who you ask. Even, the medical community has always been divided on the issue of what is the short-term impact and the long-term impact. And this is...
Are you sure about that? Are you sure? Like a 14-year-old smoking dope every day, there's no long-term impact of that?
On this issue of the long-term impact and what it will do to your brain, etc. There are some physicians who will agree with you, and you have others who would say, well, we have to be cautious here, because if you want to get serious about drugs, there may be other more dangerous drugs that are easily accessible, and we are not developing at the same time the same kind of campaign that we have done in the past targeting marijuana. And this has been one of the characteristics of the debate throughout especially the last 40 or 45 years. When young kids were targeted because they were smoking marijuana, they said, well, what about alcohol? Alcohol, how come we don't launch a major campaign telling you alcohol can kill you? But of course the perception, the public perception of alcohol use was slightly different from the one that we have now. In the 60s,
because it was a legal product.
It was illegal, but at the same time, in the 60s it was cool. You drink after work, you drive, and then, well, what? This is sad if you kill someone. Well, today in 2018, if I'm telling you in public, well, you can drive and kill, that's not drive your car under the influence of alcohol, people will look at me saying, who are you, to come and tell us that this is cool? Then same thing with marijuana and other drugs. Many have said, well, we have prescribed drugs that you can have access to. They kill, and we are not launching the same passion when it comes to lecturing people on the dangers of drugs.
Yeah, let me follow up on that with Catherine, because pretty clearly, if this drug is going to be legalized later this year and sold for recreational use, the stigma around it, even in the intervening 4 years, has changed quite a bit. Isn't that apparent?
I think the stigma has changed, but I think there's still a lot of parents concerned about marijuana use amongst their kids or amongst their kids' friends. And so, I mean, we do still see a substantial percentage of the Canadian population that feels somewhat uneasy with this legislation. And so I think it'll take a while for that to change. And I think one of the advantages of the legalization is that we will see some better science emerge on the long-term effects of marijuana that'll enable us to make better public health decisions moving forward.
Do you have I know you're a professor of history, not a professor of science, but do you have a view on what you've read so far about studies that is, in your judgment, conclusive about young people smoking too much dope too early in life?
I think it's very hard to know. I mean, I certainly would be concerned about a 14-year-old who's smoking marijuana every day, but not necessarily because of the effects of the marijuana. I mean, to me, the fact that if a 14-year-old is smoking every day, it means that there's something else going on in their life, which is probably worthy of looking into. I mean, we do have a huge mental health crisis amongst young people today, as we see in our universities. And so, that needs to be addressed. I don't think marijuana is a substantial element in all of that.
Kwasi, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think, like when we look at the effects of cannabis in comparison to some other drugs as well, like alcohol, for example, although, as I've said, research on cannabis has been kind of curtailed because of its legal status, Professor Nutt of the United Kingdom has evaluated the harms, both social and physical, that drugs have. And it's tobacco, alcohol, and then heroin, of course, but tobacco and alcohol that are at the top of that list, not cannabis. And so if we're thinking about drugs that young people have access to, they have access to both of those. And rates of use for tobacco may be going down. Alcohol, I'm not sure on, but I don't think cannabis features as one of the key concerns with regards to all drugs.
But clearly, if the government now intends to legalize and offer for sale, as we will in the province of Ontario, it'll be a government marketed and sold substance. If the government is putting its, if I can call it this, good housekeeping seal of approval on this product, then presumably a lot of the stigma around this has disappeared. Is that right?
Well, not sure if the stigma's disappeared. Just to go back on that point, though, with regards to young people's use, I think some of the allure for young people might actually go away once it's legalized.
Not so subversive anymore.
Exactly. Canadian youth have amongst the highest rates of use in the world as it stands right now with the drug's illegal status. When we do look at jurisdictions south of the border that have decriminalized or legalized, rates of use generally and those amongst youth do not skyrocket. So I'm not concerned necessarily on use overall, perhaps problematic use, but perhaps the drug will lose some of its allure to young people.
Marcel, let me give you the last word. Is there a danger now, given that we're about to move into a legal regime, is there a danger of treating marijuana as a completely benign substance?
I don't think it will happen, overnight. I think the next 12 months, there'll be individuals who will express maybe their concerns. But I suspect that, over time, what has happened with alcohol will happen with marijuana. There'll be also, and this is maybe something we should welcome, the fact that now it will be possible to study the impact, not only the short-term impact but also the long-term impact, and it will probably trigger a larger discussion about drug use in general, including those substances that are still illegal. What are we doing with those who have developed dependence?
Catherine, I got to ask you one last question. Are you related to the former Senator Sharon?
Yes, I am. She's my mother.
She's your mother, okay. I didn't know, but I know everybody at home was wondering and wanted me to ask the question, so there I did. Okay, good. Give her our best. I remember her well. Catherine Carstairs is a professor of history at the University of Guelph. She is the author of Jailed for Possession. And we are grateful that you could spare some time for us from Chicago, Illinois today. Marcel Martel is here, the Avi Bennett Historica Chair in Canadian History at York University. His contribution on this subject is Not This Time. And Akwasi Owusu-Bempah, Professor of Sociology, University of Toronto. Great to have the three of you on TVO tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.